Didn't you think I'd recognize you?
I recognized you the moment you walked through that door, Nkechi.
I beg you. I just need a job. Any job.
5 years ago, you stole the only chance I ever had, and you never apologized. Today, you're sitting across from me, asking for a job.
The room held that silence the way a held breath holds itself before it breaks. Outside the glass, Lagos carried on exactly as it always did, indifferent to what had just happened inside this office. 5 years is a long time to wait for a door to turn and finally face you, but it is not nearly as long as the family behind that other gate believed it would be. To understand this moment, you have to go back 18 years to a house in Onitsha with 2 wives, 2 families, and 1 daughter who was always reminded that she did not fully belong to either. The Eze house on Apka Road had 2 gates, but only 1 man passed through both of them each evening. Chief Obiora Eze ran a small transport business, moving goods between Onitsha and Lagos, wealthy enough to keep 2 households, never quite wealthy enough to give them the same life. Behind the main gate lived Lolo Patricia Eze and her daughter Nkechi, in a house with a generator that ran through the night and a housegirl who tidied every room before breakfast. 2 streets away, in a modest 3-room house, lived Adaobi and her mother. No one in the extended family said it directly, but everyone understood it. Adaobi was the daughter of the other woman. She carried the Eze name and the Eze blood, but she was never invited to the birthday parties held behind the main gate. Her mother sewed for hire year-round to keep her in school, and never once complained in front of her daughter about the arrangement that had shaped both of their lives. Her mother had been a market trader's daughter herself, raised to believe that a woman's dignity came from her work, not from the gate she happened to live behind. She had loved Chief Eze once, fully, and paid for it with a quiet exile that never had a name, only a shape the whole family recognized and chose never to discuss. Nkechi, a year older, grew up in the house where the lights never went out and breakfast was already laid by the time anyone woke. She was not cruel in any obvious way. She simply believed the world had already been arranged in its proper order, and that Adaobi occupied a step below her in that order. Every time the 2 girls crossed paths at family gatherings, Nkechi found a way to remind her cousin of her place, gently enough that no adult would ever call it unkind. There was a family gathering Adaobi never forgot, the year she turned 14. She arrived in a dress her mother had carefully repaired at the collar so the wear would not show, while Nkechi wore something new, bought in Lagos, with a bow at the waist. A distant cousin looked Adaobi over and remarked to the woman beside her, loud enough to be heard, that this particular child always wore old things, that it was a pity she had been born to the wrong mother. Adaobi did not cry in front of them. She finished her plate, smiled in all the right places, and waited until she was alone in the bathroom to let the tears come. That night, her mother sat beside her without asking what was wrong, and told her, simply, that people only ever see the dress a girl is wearing, never the distance she is traveling, and that she should never let anyone teach her to measure herself by what they saw. Adaobi carried that sentence longer than any comfort she was ever given afterward. The unfairness showed itself most plainly at the start of every school term. Chief Eze paid Nkechi's fees at one of the better private schools in Onitsha without being asked twice, while Adaobi's fees at the public secondary school down the road often arrived weeks late, even though her results were consistently the stronger of the 2. When a teacher once remarked, in front of the whole extended family, that Adaobi clearly had the sharper mind, Chief Eze only laughed and said that sharpness did not change which gate a girl had been born behind. He likely meant it as nothing more than an awkward joke. Adaobi never heard it that way. It was not only words that traveled from the main house to the smaller one. The year Adaobi won a regional essay competition, Nkechi mentioned to an aunt, almost in passing, that the work had actually been a group effort, and that Adaobi had simply been the one lucky enough to have her name printed on the certificate. The story reached every relevant ear within days. The way a story built to diminish someone always travels faster than the truth meant to correct it. Adaobi never confronted her sister about it. She only noticed, quietly, that whenever something good happened to her, Nkechi's first instinct was never to celebrate it, but to find some way to make it smaller. It was a pattern Adaobi had grown almost used to by then, small and survivable on its own, the kind of thing a family absorbs without ever naming it out loud. She did not yet know that patterns like this one rarely stay small forever. They wait, quietly, for something large enough to finally be worth taking. What she was traveling toward from the age of 16 was a kitchen. Not her own kitchen, the kitchen of a small eatery near Onitsha Market, where she took weekend work washing vegetables, peeling garlic, and learning by feel how much pepper a pot of soup needed to satisfy the oldest person at any table. She told no one at school about this work. She simply did it, quietly, with the same patience she brought to everything in her life. At 18, she heard about a license placement program offering 18 months of paid culinary and hospitality training in Dubai, with the possibility of permanent employment afterward. The registration fee, the flight, and the required deposits added up to more money than she had ever held at once. It took her 3 years to save it, 3 years of selling plates of food after school, recording every coin in a small notebook tucked inside her mother's old Bible, the only place in the house she trusted no one would think to look. Chief Eze knew about this ambition. He never discouraged her, and he never truly stood behind her either. He was the kind of man who believed peace in the house mattered more than taking a side, even when the side in question was his own daughter's. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, stamped in red by the placement agency, with a departure date exactly 12 days away. Adaobi read it 4 times before she let herself believe it. She carried it to the main house, not because she needed permission, but because after 18 years, she still believed good news belonged to the whole family, whether the family acknowledged her or not. Her father held the letter carefully, the way a man holds something he does not want to admit matters to him, and told her, in his own quiet way, that she had done this entirely on her own. There was something close to pride in how he said it, though he had never learned to say such things plainly. Nkechi stood in the doorway and heard all of it. She said nothing in that moment, but she did not forget it either. Whatever she decided to do next, she did not decide it suddenly. She decided it slowly, over the following days, the way people only ever do when something has been building in them for a long time before it finally breaks the surface, not because she wanted the program for herself, but because she could not bear the thought that the outside child would be the first person in that house to leave the country by her own effort. The night before her flight, Adaobi packed every document she would need: her ticket, her acceptance letter, her passport, her deposit receipts, into a small bag and placed it beneath her pillow, exactly as she had done each night that week, to be certain nothing went missing during the last days of packing. She slept that night with a peace she rarely allowed herself. By morning, the bag was gone. She searched every corner of the room, every fold of the bedding, called her mother at the market, called her father, and ran to the main house with none of the calm she usually carried. Lolo Patricia sat in the parlor with a cup of tea, entirely undisturbed, and explained that Nkechi had left early that morning, that she had mentioned some opportunity of her own in Dubai, and that she had not asked further questions. Adaobi told her that the documents belonged to her, that the ticket carried her name, that the acceptance letter had been written for her alone. Lolo Patricia suggested, in the same even voice, that perhaps the carelessness was Adaobi's own, and that she should be careful where she placed blame. Chief Eze stood at the door through all of it, and said nothing in his daughter's defense. That silence, more than any single sentence anyone spoke that morning, was the clearest answer Adaobi had ever received about where she truly stood in that house. She would remember, for years afterward, the particular cruelty of being told to be careful where she placed blame, by the very woman sitting closest to the person who had taken everything from her. It was not only the bag that had been stolen that morning. It was the version of the story in which Adaobi, once again, was the one expected to be at fault. What none of them understood, standing in that parlor with a cup of tea going cold on the table, was that a theft like this one does not simply disappear once the thief has walked out the door with it. It waits, patiently, for the day it is finally asked to answer for itself. News traveled out of the Eze compound faster than anyone could have contained it. By afternoon, 2 women at the shared water tap had already rearranged the story into something else entirely, that Adaobi had misplaced her own papers and tried to blame her sister for it, that she had always envied Nkechi, that the outside child had finally shown her true nature. Adaobi argued with none of it. She had learned early that disputing a story people had already finished telling only kept your name attached to it longer. Her mother sat on the veranda that evening without tears, only staring down the dark road with the expression of a woman doing arithmetic she did not like the answer to. 3 years of saving, she said quietly, more to herself than to her daughter. 3 years. Adaobi did not answer right away. She looked into the house, toward the empty space inside her mother's Bible where the savings had once been kept, and made herself a promise she did not speak aloud, in the same way she had always kept the things that mattered most to herself. This would not be the end of her story. A week later, she packed a single bag, held her mother for a long moment, and took a bus to Lagos. Her father stood at the gate watching her leave, his mouth opening as though he meant to say something, then closing again without a word. It was, in the end, exactly the kind of man he had always been. Lagos welcomed her with a cramped room in Mile 12, a landlady named Mama Florence who cared only that the rent arrived on time, and savings that would carry her through perhaps 3 careful weeks. She began again exactly where she had always begun, in a kitchen that belonged to someone else. She found work washing dishes and preparing ingredients at a small catering stall in Ajegunle that served weddings and birthday parties, taking the lowest position in the kitchen without a single complaint. On the nights, she sat alone after her shift, listening to a city that never fully slept drift through a window with no screen against the insects. She reminded herself, quietly, that disgrace was a season, not a life sentence. The owner of the catering stall was a heavy-set woman named Mama Patience, her hands marked with small burn scars collected over 20 years at a stove. She rarely spoke, but she watched closely. After 3 months of observing Adaobi, always the first to arrive and the last to leave, never wasting an ingredient, never needing to be told anything twice, she called the girl in one morning before the kitchen opened and asked, plainly, whether she had cooked before coming there. Adaobi told her she had taught herself, at home, cooking for her family. Mama Patience asked to see proof, and watched without comment as the girl prepared a pot of egusi soup with hands that did not shake. She tasted it, said nothing for a long moment, and then told the girl that from that day forward she would stand at the stove, not the sink. That was the first door. Far away, Nkechi was learning something no one had warned her about. Receiving an opportunity is not the same as earning it. The Dubai program demanded a discipline she had never had to practice: strict schedules, weekly accountability, an intensity of training she experienced as punishment rather than privilege. She began missing sessions, found new friends who made the missing feel like freedom, and spent her living allowance faster than it arrived. Within 4 months, she had been quietly dismissed from the program. She did not call home to explain this. She told her mother everything was fine. Adaobi knew none of it. She had no room left for wondering. She was learning to read a customer's needs from the ratio of her ingredients, learning how a single spice could rescue or ruin a dish, learning how to make a single table look as though it had been prepared by 10 hands instead of 2. After 8 months, Mama Patience handed her a large client, an engagement celebration for a merchant's daughter, 120 guests, with Adaobi responsible for the food and Mama Patience only supervising. She told the girl simply to make sure her hands did not lie to her. They did not. The event went perfectly, so well that the bride's mother photographed every dish and told everyone within reach about the young woman who had truly made the day. Within that same week, 3 new clients came asking for Adaobi by name, not Mama Patience's. She did not celebrate loudly. She returned to her small room in mile 12, sat on the edge of her bed, and allowed herself one quiet moment that felt, finally, like proof. This was actually happening. 2 years after arriving in Lagos, Adaobi opened her own stall, a single rented corner inside the Oyingbo food market, under a name she chose herself, Adaobi's Table. Mama Patience came to the opening, sat in the front row, tasted every small dish set before her, and offered the only sentence she ever used to express pride in another person. She had known from the first day that this girl's hands never lied to her. Over the following 3 years, Adaobi's Table grew from a single market corner into a team of 8, serving weddings and corporate events across Lagos. She sent money home to her mother regularly, though her mother always insisted it was not necessary. She did not call the main house in Onitsha. She no longer needed to. In the 4th year, Adaobi's Table appeared on a short list of favorite catering brands at a small industry recognition event in Lagos. She was invited to speak for 3 minutes, an invitation she declined as gracefully as she could, sending a representative instead. Adaobi had never enjoyed standing in front of a camera. She preferred standing in front of a stove burning at exactly the right heat. In Onitsha, another story was quietly coming apart. Chief Eze, who had built his transport business on revolving loans, ran into difficulty when 2 major contracts were cancelled at once. Lolo Patricia, who had always believed the household's money was endless, began selling, piece by piece, the jewelry she had once worn to every family gathering to affirm her position. Nkechi returned to Nigeria in the 4th year, quietly, with a single bag and a face far older than her actual years. She offered no real details about what had happened in Dubai, only that the program had not suited her, and that she had decided to come home and look for something else. The longer, uglier truth she kept to herself, the way her family had always kept anything inconvenient to itself. It took her 6 months to find work, facing more rejection than she had ever imagined a woman carrying the Eze name could face. The confidence she had once never had to think about became something she had to learn to live without, one day at a time. One evening, scrolling through job listings on her phone, she stopped at a single posting, Event Coordinator Wanted Adaobi's Table, Lagos. She looked at the name for a long time. Something in it made her hands turn cold, though she told herself several times over that Adaobi was a common enough name, and that 5 years was a long time for a door to close completely. She submitted her application that same night, before her own doubt could talk her out of it, telling herself she had nothing left to lose and very little pride remaining to protect. Nkechi's application reached the human resources desk of Adaobi's Table on an ordinary Monday morning, among more than 30 others. Adaobi's assistant, a young woman named Funke, reviewed each file before passing the final shortlist along, and mentioned, almost in passing, that one candidate named Nkechi Eze had not stood out in the first round, though her experience organizing events abroad seemed worth a second look. Adaobi looked at the name on her screen longer than she intended to. She had thought about this moment before, not often, but enough to know exactly what it would feel like when it finally arrived. Not the satisfaction she had once imagined years earlier, but a strange calm, the way it feels to watch a stone finally settle at the bottom it was always going to reach. She told Funke to move the candidate forward and confirmed when her assistant pointed out that the next round was the final interview with her personally, that she understood exactly what that meant. The final interview took place on a Thursday morning. Nkechi arrived on time, sitting in the reception area with a tension she had never felt walking into a job interview before, partly because she had run out of other options, and partly because something about the company's name had unsettled her. Though she had told herself repeatedly it was nothing more than coincidence. When her name was called, she was shown into a tidy office with a window overlooking Lagos and a chair turned away from her, facing the city. She sat down. The chair turned to face her. The air left her body before she understood what was happening. She had not known until that exact second that the company belonged to her half-sister. For several seconds, she could not speak at all. And when she finally found her voice, it came out smaller than anything she had ever said in her life. She managed only to explain that she had not known, that she had never imagined this company could possibly be the one her sister had built. Adaobi did not lean forward. She did not raise her voice, and she showed no satisfaction in the moment, no cruelty either. She simply sat with the full, settled weight of a woman who had decided exactly how this moment would unfold long before it ever arrived, and let her sister understand, without a single dramatic gesture, that nothing about this meeting was an accident. What followed was not an interview at all, but the conversation neither of them had ever had the chance to finish 5 years earlier. Nkechi tried, haltingly, to explain herself that she had genuinely tried in Dubai, that nothing there had gone the way she expected, that she had thought about the missing bag more times than her sister could possibly imagine, every time her own life abroad had begun to fall apart. Adaobi asked her, simply, why she had done it in the first place. The question took Nkechi longer to answer than any other moment in the conversation. She admitted, finally, that she had never been able to bear the thought of her sister being the first person in that household to leave the country through her own effort alone, that she had grown up with every material advantage and still could not tolerate her sister possessing the one thing money in that house had never been able to buy. A kind of respect she had not had a name for at the time, and now understood clearly as genuine admiration, earned rather than inherited. Adaobi studied her sister for a long moment. It was not the apology she had once imagined receiving, but it was more honest than anything Nkechi had ever said to her in 23 years as sisters. She asked whether their father knew Nkechi had come here today. Nkechi admitted that no one knew, that she could not bear for anyone in the family to learn she was applying for a coordinator's position after everything she had once said about her sister. A silence settled between them that was no longer sharp the way it had once been, only heavy with everything unsaid for 5 years. Adaobi folded her hands on the desk, looked toward the window for a moment, and then looked back at her sister directly. She told her, without warmth and without coldness, that she forgave her, not because Nkechi had earned that forgiveness in this single conversation, but because she had no wish to carry the weight of that night for one more day of her own life. Nkechi wept then, for the first time in the conversation that felt genuine rather than desperate, not from fear, but from relief. Adaobi made clear, in the same steady voice, that forgiveness did not mean a place on her team. It was not an act of revenge, she explained. She had been offered easier opportunities for that over the past 5 years and had taken none of them. There were 3 other candidates more qualified for this particular role, and choosing her sister simply because of blood would mean repeating the exact failure her own family had once committed against her, valuing relation over merit. She told Nkechi plainly that there would be no money either, and no introductions to her clients, not because she lacked the means, but because her sister needed to build her own path the same way she herself had, rather than borrow a shortcut through 5 years of work that had not been hers to take. Nkechi asked, quietly, why she had been called in at all if not to be hired. Adaobi stood, walked to the door, and opened it, not coldly, but with a clarity she had clearly thought through long before this meeting. She told her sister she had wanted her to see this room, this office, the kitchen beyond the window where 8 employees were preparing for that evening's event, so that she would understand the bag taken from beneath a pillow 5 years earlier had never managed to take the one thing that actually mattered. She told her, finally, that it was time for Nkechi to go and find her own road, the way everyone eventually has to when no one is willing to open the door for them. Nkechi left without another word, carrying something heavier than disappointment, and, for the first time in years, something that resembled clarity rather than excuses. That evening, Adaobi called her mother, as she had twice every week for 5 years, and recounted the entire conversation without leaving out a single detail. Her mother listened until the end before offering her judgment that her daughter had done the right thing, that forgiveness was never a gift handed to the person who had caused the harm, but a door a person opened for their own sake, so they would not have to carry someone else's weight for the rest of their life. A week later, Chief Eze called his daughter for the first time in years. He said little, only that he had heard what had happened. That he was sorry for his silence on the morning the documents disappeared, and that he was proud of the path she had walked since, though he admitted he had no real right to say so. After everything he had failed to do, Adaobi thanked him, neither coldly nor with more warmth than the moment required, and told him she had not needed his words to know she had walked the right road. In Onitsha, people told this story in different versions for years afterward, but nearly all of them arrived at the same conclusion. What a person takes from you in a single night will never outweigh what another person builds with patient hands across 5 years. A father's silence, however unintended, leaves its own mark, one that eventually finds its way back, demanding, sooner or later, to be reckoned with. And a comfort built on another person's loss never sits as comfortably as the people who took it expect it to. Adaobi's table kept growing. Her mother moved to Lagos in the 6th year, no longer sewing for hire just to survive, and the 2 women shared breakfast each morning in a small house that finally belonged entirely to them, with no one's permission required for them to be there. Nkechi, as Adaobi later learned, took a position at a smaller catering company back in Onitsha, starting from the lowest rung, the way most people eventually have to when no one chooses to open a door for them first. The 2 sisters rarely spoke. But at certain times of year, a brief message still passed between them, from both sides, enough to keep the door from closing entirely, though never quite enough to open it, as though nothing had happened between them. Some things can be stolen in a single night, but other things, once built by patient hands, can never be taken a second time. If you stayed with this story until the very end, leave a comment and let us know where you are watching from. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next one.